Look, when you think of chocolate, what's the very first thing that pops into your head? You're probably picturing Switzerland, right? Or maybe Belgium. Just a beautifully wrapped, perfectly sweet, solid bar. Well, get ready to have your mind blown, because that is honestly one of the biggest misconceptions in all of culinary history. The truth is, while Europeans were still wandering around in untamed forests, the ancient civilizations of Central America were already brewing this incredible black gold from a sacred bean. But here's the catch. This wasn't the sweet treat we all know today. Not at all. It was a seriously potent drink strictly reserved for the elite. So over the next few minutes of this explainer, we're going to peel back the layers of a 4,000-year-old mystery. We are exploring an era where chocolate absolutely wasn't sweet. It was spicy, it was bitter, and it was deeply, deeply mysterious.
Here is our agenda for today. 1. The true origins. 2. The Olmec pioneers. 3. Mayan ritual of Xocolatl. 4. Aztec chocolate currency. And 5. Spain's sweet state secret.
We are covering some serious ground on the timeline today. We're starting all the way back in 1900 BC with the Olmecs, then we'll move through the height of the Mayan era, leap into the 14th century with the mighty Aztec Empire, and finally crash right into the year 1519 with the Spanish conquest. It's a massive chronological sweep, and as you'll see, every single one of these eras completely redefined what chocolate meant to human civilization.
Section 1. The true origins. Not sweet, not solid.
Section 2. The Olmec Pioneers. First taste of cacao.
Okay, so prepare to have all your expectations totally subverted here. If someone handed you a cup of ancient chocolate, honestly, you probably wouldn't even recognize it. It was entirely liquid, aggressively bitter, and really, really spicy. Now, history books, well, a lot of them anyway, mistakenly start the story with the Mayans. But incredible archaeological detective work points us way further back to Mexico's very first major civilization, the Olmecs. So, how do we actually know this? Scientists found traces of a chemical compound called theobromine inside ancient Olmec pottery. And why does that matter? Well, because theobromine is a chemical found exclusively in cacao. So finding it baked into their clay pots is the ultimate, undeniable proof that the Olmecs were the literal pioneers, the very first people to process the sacred bean.
But guys, here's where it gets genuinely wild. The Olmecs weren't just roasting the beans to make some warm, comforting beverage. No way. They would crack open these massive cacao pods, scoop out the white, fleshy pulp from the inside, and they fermented it. That's right. The very first iteration of chocolate in human history wasn't a candy. It was a highly intoxicating, fermented alcoholic drink. The whole journey of chocolate literally started with a buzz.
Section 3. Mayan ritual of Xocolatl, a divine gift.
Fast forward a bit, and the Mayans took this cacao and completely elevated it. It became this revered, divine gift that they actually grew right in their own courtyards. It wasn't just food to them. It was a sacred, ritualistic cornerstone of their entire culture. And the way they prepared it, it's just fascinating. First, they'd dry the beans out under the hot sun. Then they carefully roasted them and ground them down on this traditional stone called a metate. They take this incredibly rich paste and mix it with water, fiery chili peppers, and fragrant vanilla. But step 5 is absolutely crucial. They would take the liquid and pour it from one vessel to another, from a really great height, specifically to create a thick, luscious foam on top.
And I cannot stress this enough. To the Mayans, a foamless cup of chocolate was seen as entirely incomplete. Honestly, it was just unacceptable. That thick foam, that was the divine standard of perfection. They called this masterfully frothed drink Xocolatl. And you know what's crazy? Even today, modern pastry chefs use manual whisking or siphon guns to get that exact kind of perfect aeration. It just goes to show the Mayans were literally thousands of years ahead of their time when it came to culinary texture.
Section 4. Aztec chocolate currency. Blood and money.
So, by the 14th century, the mighty Aztecs had conquered Mexico. But they had a problem. They couldn't grow cacao in their own cold, dry lands. So what did they do? They demanded it as a strict tax or tribute from the conquered Mayans. Chocolate literally became the lifeblood of their economy. It was their official currency. Just to put that into perspective for a second, one single bean could buy you a large tomato. 3 beans? That got you a fresh avocado. And if you were a real high roller, dropping 100 cacao beans could purchase an entire turkey. I mean, money quite literally grew on trees for them. 50. Just wrap your head around that number for a second. 50 is the number of golden cups of chocolate that the famous Aztec king Montezuma II reportedly drank every single day. And, just to flex his immense wealth and power, once he finished a cup, he would just throw the solid gold goblet away, literally toss it. That is exactly how highly he valued the liquid inside compared to the literal gold that was holding it.
Now, the Aztecs actually didn't call it chocolat. They had their own word, Xocolatl, which beautifully translates to precious liquid. For elite Aztec warriors, this definitely wasn't some casual afternoon beverage. It was an energizing, vital life force. They would chug massive amounts of this precious liquid right before heading into brutal battles. And honestly, they were right to do it. Given the massive hit of caffeine and theobromine, it drastically increased their physical endurance. It was basically the ancient world's ultimate pre-workout drink.
Section 5. Spain's Sweet State Secret, the Conquest.
Then, everything changed. In 1519, Spanish explorer Hernán Cortés arrived in Mexico and witnessed King Montezuma drinking this strange, bitter, incredibly spicy concoction. Cortés immediately recognized its immense power and value. So the Spanish brought it back to Europe, and they made a culinary pivot that would fundamentally alter history forever. Out went the fiery chili peppers, and in came sweet sugarcane and natural honey. By stripping away that intense spice and adding all that sweetness, the Spanish took this ancient warrior fuel and completely transformed it into a luxurious, decadent treat.
And let me tell you, it was an absolute sensation. It was such a massive hit in the Spanish rail courts that the government made a pretty incredible decision. For 100 years, the recipe for sweetened chocolate was kept as a strict state secret. Just let that sink in for a second. An entire century. If you even dared to leak the secret of how to make this sweet drink, you would face severe, severe punishment by the state. No joke.
But of course, come on, no culinary secret this delicious can stay hidden forever. Slowly but surely, the recipe leaked across borders. First, it reached the curious palates of Italy, and then it absolutely swept through France. Almost overnight, chocolate became the ultimate status symbol for Europe's elite upper class. The intensely bitter, sacred blood and money drink of the ancient Americas had been entirely rebranded into a lavish European luxury.
Which brings us to the ultimate question. We've just traced 4,000 years of chocolate history, but throughout this entire explainer, notice how it has always remained a liquid? Whether it was a spicy foam, an intoxicating alcoholic brew, or a sweet royal secret, it was always a drink. So how on earth did this ancient sacred liquid transform into the modern, solid, milk and butter-filled chocolate bar that totally dominates the pastry world today? Well, the science of the Industrial Revolution holds that answer, and that is exactly what we will uncover next time. Until then, stay curious.
Welcome back, colleagues and connoisseurs. Chef Devu here, and I'm absolutely thrilled to jump right into part 2 of our explainer series on the evolution of chocolate. In our last session, we followed chocolate's journey as a prestigious, aristocratic drink. But getting from that ancient beverage to the hyper-precise, beautifully crafted solid chocolate we use in modern laboratory kitchens, well, that wasn't just a simple shift in taste. It required nothing short of a massive industrial and chemical revolution.
I mean, think about it. For centuries, right up into the 1800s, chocolate was strictly a beverage. And honestly, it was notoriously gritty. It was incredibly viscous, super oily, and pretty cumbersome on the palate. It was just a heavy drink. So how exactly did we get from a thick, gritty liquid to the flawlessly smooth, solid bar that snaps perfectly in your hands? Today, we are looking at true industrial alchemy to solve that exact problem. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We're going to kick things off with the Great Transformation and the game-changing hydraulic cocoa press. From there, we'll hit the birth of the first chocolate bar and those crucial Swiss breakthroughs. Then, we are shifting from macro-engineering history straight into the micro-engineering chemistry of tempering before wrapping it all up with the future of chocolate. We've got a lot of fascinating ground to cover, so let's get right to it.
Part 1. The Great Transformation. We are officially leaving the opulent palaces of Europe and stepping straight into the soot-stained industrial laboratory kitchens of the 19th century.
By the early 1800s, chocolate was basically at a culinary standstill. And the issue wasn't a lack of imagination from chefs, it was a pure chemistry problem. Cacao, right out of nature, makes a drink that is heavily fatty and notoriously difficult to emulsify with water or milk. If you've ever tried whisking oil and water together, you know exactly what the European elite were fighting every single time they made a cup. It was a fatty challenge that desperately needed a mechanical solution to evolve into the sophisticated foundation of l'art de la pâtisserie.
Part 2. The hydraulic cocoa press. The 1828 mechanical revolution that flipped the script forever.
The raw composition of the bean brilliantly illustrates the hurdle here. A natural cacao bean is roughly 50% fat, what we call cocoa butter, and 50% cocoa solids.
That massive fat content was the exact culprit making the historical drink basically an oil slick. Enter a brilliant Dutch chemist named Konrad von Houten. He realizes, hey, if the fat is the problem, let's just remove it. So he invents this massive mechanical device, the hydraulic cocoa press, to physically crush the roasted nibs, squeezing out the excess cocoa butter and leaving behind a dry press cake that could easily be ground into a fine powder.
The before and after here is absolutely night and day. Pre-1828 chocolate, a gritty, exclusive, oily luxury. But post-1828 chocolate, thanks to Van Houten's press, suddenly had precisely controlled fat. It was highly soluble, forming a beautiful, stable, silky emulsion. And maybe most importantly, it became accessible. This was literally the birth of mass-market cocoa.
But Van Houten wasn't done yet. He also developed a process known as Dutching. By treating the beans with alkaline salts, he neutralized their natural volatile acids. This darkened the powder and stripped out that harsh, astringent bitterness, giving us the mellow profile we know today. Now here is the ultimate crazy irony of this era. That 50% fat, the pure cocoa butter squeezed out by the press. Early manufacturers thought it was totally useless waste. They literally threw it in the trash. They had absolutely no idea they were tossing out the most precious structural ingredient in a modern chocolatier's arsenal.
Part 3, the first chocolate bar. Because obviously someone was eventually going to realize that throwing away pure cocoa butter was a colossal mistake.
Look at how fast the industrial dominoes fall here. We get the press in 1828, but jump ahead to 1847, and a British guy named Joseph Fry has a total light bulb moment. He takes cocoa powder, mixes it with sugar, and then, in a stroke of absolute genius, takes that discarded waste cocoa butter and folds it right back into the mixture. By supercharging the fat ratio, he invented the world's very first moldable, edible, solid chocolate paste. For thousands of years, chocolate was something you drank. As of 1847, it was finally something you could eat.
Part 4, the Swiss breakthroughs. Now, Fry's bar was a game changer, for sure, but it was still a rough, intensely dark paste. We really needed the Swiss to smooth things out.
The Swiss essentially delivered two massive breakthroughs that gave us modern luxury textures. First, Daniel Peter was pulling his hair out trying to invent milk chocolate, but the water and fresh milk kept making his batches seize up like concrete. Luckily, his neighbor Henri Nestlé had just invented condensed milk. By removing the water, they could add milk without ruining the emulsion. Then, in 1879, Rodolphe Lindt accidentally leaves his longitudinal mixing machine running for days. That happy accident gave us conching, constant heat and aeration that cooks off harsh acids and perfectly coats every single microscopic particle in fat. That's how we got the incredible, melt-in-your-mouth couverture quality we demand today.
Part 5, the science of tempering. We've seen the machines, but now it's time to slow it down and understand the molecules.
Listen closely, because this is the core of modern pastry. Chocolate is a polymorphic crystalline lattice. Because cocoa butter is polymorphic, it can solidify into 6 completely different crystal forms depending entirely on how it cools. And forms I through 4, they are a total nightmare. They melt way too easily, they crumble, or they instantly develop that gross, chalky white streak known as fat bloom. Form 6 takes months to set and turns into an unchewable rock. So out of 6 possible outcomes, 5 of them will completely ruin your product. Take a second to let that sink in. Now, what's absolutely crucial here is our target, Form V. This is the stable beta crystal structure, forcing millions of microscopic cocoa butter molecules to lock together perfectly into this specific Form V lattice. That is the entire, literal goal of the master chocolatier. It is the non-negotiable professional standard. Without Form V, you simply do not have fine chocolate. When you successfully nail that Form V structure, you unlock what we call the holy trinity of quality. First is the snap. When you break a piece, it shouldn't bend, it needs to give a sharp, clean, audible crack. Second is the gloss. We want a brilliant, mirror-like sheen that catches the light, none of that dull amateur finish. And finally, structural integrity. As Form V crystals set, they actually contract just a tiny bit, which lets the chocolate pop out of a mold flawlessly while staying totally stable at room temperature.
So, the million-dollar question, how do we force it into Form V? We use a highly precise thermal cycle called tempering. Here's how it works. Step 1, melting. We take the chocolate up to 45 or 50 degrees Celsius to completely destroy every existing crystal. Total clean slate. Step 2, cooling. We rapidly drop the temperature and agitate it, maybe on a marble slab, to kickstart seed crystal growth. Step 3,
reheating. We carefully raise the temp back up to exactly 31 to 32 degrees Celsius for dark chocolate. Why that specific tiny window? Because 31 degrees is hot enough to melt away all the garbage form I through IV crystals we don't want, but just cool enough to preserve those precious form V crystals we desperately need. It is literal molecular engineering.
Part 6. The future of chocolate. This molecular understanding is the boundary separating the amateur from the master. But as we look at the science, where do we go from here?
The future of the industry is actually looking back to its roots. The vanguard today is all about the bean-to-bar movement. After centuries of using heavy machinery and science to homogenize everything perfectly, masters are now using that exact same science to protect and highlight the specific terroir, the unique soil and climate of regional cacao. We want to ensure that ethical sourcing and those incredibly distinct natural flavor profiles survive all the intense processing we just talked about.
And that brings us to a final thought to chew on. From the ancient Mayan jungles some 4,000 years ago, right up to the ultra-precise laboratory kitchens of today, chocolate's evolution is an absolute triumph of chemistry and human ingenuity. Moving forward, how will we continue balancing the rugged reality of ancient origins with this exacting molecular science to shape the craft? I really hope you found this explainer illuminating, guys. It's an incredibly vast, beautiful world of flavor and physics. Keep learning,